Hello everyone, this is a recording of the last instructor meeting session that we had together a couple weeks ago. I'll try to go quickly through the steps that were included in the exercise that we did together, which was the titling animation lesson. So we're using the tutorial footage, and right now we have a simple one-layer timeline. So the first step is to add the X-Ball logo clip at the end of the timeline. There's different ways to add a still image to the timeline and stretch it to the proper length. In this case, we are going to use some hotkeys. So I'll start by copying the X-Ball logo to the end of the timeline. So I'm going to drag it while holding the C key. So we need to zoom in to see the actual element, and as well I'm going to select it. In this case, we're going to use a shortcut to trim to the positioner. If I click on the timecode field here and I add 300 and click add, the positioner jumps 3 seconds later. And with the logo clip still selected, press Shift E up arrow on the keyboard, Shift E up arrow, and this will trim the clip to the positioner. Now we're going to animate the logo using an Axis Soft Effect and Auto Key. Enable the Axis Soft Effect and keep the Auto Key button on. Enter the editor and make sure that you are at the first frame. We're going to start off with a large blurred logo at frame 1. Then we want it to scale down, and at the end come back to its default size. So change the scale value to 200 and also set the X-blur value to 100. Then let's create an animation keyframe 10 frames later. So just go 10 frames later and change the scale value now to 90%. Also reset the X-blur value to 0. Okay, so let's add a last keyframe to this animation. So go at the last frame, which is frame 72, and set the scale value back to 100. You can scrub the result. So to obtain a nicer blur, we can switch the box type to Gaussian. And now we can scrub, and we see that we have a logo that is quickly zooming out and then zooming in again. Alright, so let's have a look at the animation menu now. If you look at the Axis 1 folder, you will see the actual animation curves, and to expand all of the channels, hold down the Option key and click on the little arrow to close and reopen the folder, and as well click on the frame button to see the entire curve. So if we scrub, we see that there is actually a problem here. Because of the Bezier interpolation curve, we see that the value of 90% is actually not the lowest value of the curve, and we can fix this by changing the interpolation type. Right now it's Bezier, but we can switch it to linear, and this way the value will interpolate linearly between the two keyframes. The interpolation type is actually a preference, and you can change this if you go in the user preferences menu to access the preferences from the text module. You can press Control Option F6, and you can choose your settings, in this case under the modules soft effect tab and under the animation settings. Okay, so I'm exiting the preferences, and also we're done with this part. So let's exit the text module back to the timeline, and why don't we process this segment. Alright, so let's move on to the next part, which is to add a subtitle on top of the logo. So I will start by adding a layer to the timeline. And I want the subtitle to start at the second keyframe of my previous animation. At this point I can switch to the standard player and use the next and previous keyframe navigation controls. And I want to use a gap effect to add my subtitle, so I'm going to select the top segment and press B to cut the segment. So now I can pick the second part, and we're going to add a text effect to it. And I also want auto key in this case. Access the text editor and click anywhere to add the text layer. And we're going to write down the subtitle. So Podium Series Paintball, if I recall correctly. So what do we want to achieve here? We simply want to align the subtitle with the logo and change a couple attributes, and also we're going to animate the kerning value. So I'm pressing Option A to select the entire text layer. Maybe we want to set the paragraph to the center. If you wish to change the font, click on the font box. The default is the discrete font. And don't forget that you can change the font type. You can also navigate to wherever your font is. In this case, I'm just going to choose one of the default font and load it. Reposition the text layer below the logo. And increase the text size to match the logo width. If you want, you can enable the outline attributes, and we can also change the color of the outline. So click on the color box and pick one of the color from the logo. And you can also increase the outline width a little bit. So let's animate the kerning value. So if we go at the last frame, we can then increase the kerning value to match the logo width. And if we go back to the first frame, we can then change back the kerning value to match again the logo width. So we just created a little animation that ease in and out. So now let's exit back to the timeline. And we simply want to add an editorial dissolve. Just make sure that no elements is actually selected on the timeline. Our focus point is on the top layer. And we can use the shortcut, which is T, or you can also press the dissolve button on the left side. So let's process the segment. And you can play back the results so far. So we could continue and add the flare clip to the timeline. But at this point we're missing the last shot, which is an action shot. Actually, it's the shot of the two jumping gladiators. If you wish to do this extra step, you can refer to the workbook exercise at page 89. If you want to create a completely different version of the logo animation at this point, you can go inside Action and load the 3D logo that is provided with this project and explore the different 3D tools inside Action.